Welcome back to the channel. This is a More Better SN coming at you with a modern mono blue tempo deck tech. This is a full control mono blue deck that's centered around the Haughty Djinn. Obviously, for obvious reasons, it discounts all of your instants and sorceries, and it also becomes a gigantic flying Djinn. So this deck is $91 on TCG Player. If you wanted to save some of the money, you can take out this Otawara and make it probably in the ballpark of $69 to $70 because that's a pretty expensive card and you can just replace it with another island. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at a mono blue tempo modern deck that's kind of like a big Haughty Djinn bomb, and I'll explain why. So looking at the deck, the big bangers of the deck are the Haughty Djinn, the Tolarian Terror, and one copy of the Eluge, the Shoreless Sea. Those are our main threats. And basically what we want to do is we want to fill up our instants and sorceries in our graveyard as fast as possible. So that way the Haughty Djinn is getting bigger and bigger because this is a 3-mana star 4 with flying. And it says that Haughty Djinn's power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So the more our graveyard is full, the more we mill ourselves, the more that this creature will become a 12, 13, 14, 15, 4. And that's why it discounts your spells by 1, so that way you can just start chaining off insane amounts of spells. All right, so what are the spells going to be? And I'll explain more of the synergies as we keep going. So at 1, we have Consider. This is a great draw card, especially for a deck like this, because on turn 1, you can look at the top card of your library, and you can decide to put that card in your graveyard if you'd like, and then you draw a card. So if you see another instant or sorcery that maybe like a Flow of Knowledge or something else that you don't want right now, you can just throw that in your graveyard, or you can do it on purpose just to bulk up the future Haughty Djinn once you finally cast it. We have Slip Out the Back. This is one of our protection spells for some of our creatures here, mostly the Djinns who we want to protect. If they try to destroy it, if they try to bounce it, if they try to do any exile that, anything like that, we get to put a 1/1 counter on that creature, and then it phases out. So phasing means treat it and anything attached to it as though they don't exist until the controller's next turn. So it phases out. It's not technically on the board anymore, so that spell doesn't work. And then once the next turn starts, the Djinn will reappear, and then they could target again if they'd like. But in the meantime, it gives it a 1/1 counter, which is nice too, because then it brings it up to that 5 toughness that's so hard to deal with. And great protection spell. Only one of those though, or 2 of those. Now we have our own bounce spell. This is Fading Hope, another fantastic bounce spell. They replaced it with Unsummon in Standard, but this one is the same thing. It's a 1-mana instant that returns a creature to its owner's hand, but this adds the extra bonus of if its mana value was 3 or less, which a Haughty Djinn is, you can scry 1 and look at the top card of your library, and you may put it on the bottom. Now, if that was a Surveil, then it would make this deck that much more powerful, because most of the time you're bouncing 3-mana creatures, whether it be your own Haughty Djinn for protection, or something else that the other team, the Unstoppable Slasher, or whatever it is. Great bounce spell. Now, Shore Up, another protection spell. So you can see that we're really big on making sure the Haughty Djinn does not die. This is a 1-mana instant. I have 2 Slip Out the Backs and 2 Shore Ups just to keep some variety, just because the one gets hexproof and the other one phases it out. So you get +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn, and then you untap it, which is the big key here. You can attack with your Djinn, and then you can wait, and when they go into attack, thinking that that's the only creature you have that's already tapped, then you just play this, and it'll untap it, surprise block, and kill one of their creatures. The next card is Moment of Truth, where you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You get to put one of those in your hand, one into the graveyard, and one in the bottom of your library. So that's great just for the Djinn and for your own card draw, where you get to look at the top 3 and then make your decisions. And looking at the top 3 to draw a card is great. It says put one of those cards in your hand. It doesn't say draw, but you give yourself a lot of flexibility on what you're going to take next, which fits into your flow of what you need to do. And with the Djinn out there, this only costs 1 mana, so that's great. All right, next thing, we're going to start getting into our counterspell package. We have Essence Scatter. We have 2 copies of that. This is a counter target creature spell. It's not just to counter a spell in general, just to counter a creature spell. With Haughty Djinn out there, it discounts this, makes it only 1 mana, and it's a nice hard counter to some of these big creatures that might be able to block your Djinn or just take over the game in general, like a Shieldred or anything like that. Then we have 1 copy of Jawari Disruption. This is one of those flip lands where in a pinch it could become a tapped blue land if you're really low on mana. Otherwise, it's a counterspell, which says counter target spell unless controller pays 1. So when they go for one of those big spells, or it's the last spell of their turn and they're totally tapped out, then you can counter a spell using this. I just like to have 1 of these in there just as a nice flexibility option. It also counts as a spell if you were to mill it. So if you just leave this side up and you mill it into your library at some point, and then it'll become one of those instants and sorceries that the Djinn can use as power. But just a nice way to make your lands work for you. Now we have Mana Leak. This is insane spell. Counter target spell unless the controller pays 3. Now, in the early game, no one's going to be able to pay 3 for whatever spell they just cast. So this is a fantastic early game counter spell, but late game, sometimes not as good. If you're trying to defend against, let's say, like some kind of kill spell that usually costs 2, and then it's towards the end of the game, so they got 5 or 6 mana open, then, this is not going to be very effective, but it could be effective in, like I said, just putting things into your graveyard and also making them use their mana so that they use their resources in a way that you don't want them to, or the way that you want them to. So we have 7 total counterspells. Next card, Suspicious Stowaway. Now this card, not everyone's going to be like, really? Or, not really think about it as a possible actual threat. This is a 1/1 for 2, and it says it can't be blocked. And then whenever it deals damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card. Now, you want to keep this on the daytime side, because on the other side, you don't have to discard a card. We would like to discard a card to fill our graveyard with more things. But it also helps us cycle through our hand and cycle through our library so that we can get the cards in our hand that we need, mainly our instants, like our counter spells or our draw spells or our bounce spells or protection. So only 2 copies of these, just as it can also be used as a good chump blocker if you need to. We have next card is Quick Study, just a 3 mana draw 2. I might swap this out for something. I can't really think of what to do. If you know what to swap this out with, where I can draw 2 cards or more with this for that amount of mana, maybe even 2 mana, please drop a comment below and let me know what card that is so I can swap it out. But with Haughty Djinn out, it'll discount this, and if you have multiple out, this will only cost 1, and then you can draw 2 cards for 1 mana, which is nice. We already talked about the Haughty Djinn. I'm going to skip Jace for now and go into the next creature, which is the Eluge, the Shortless Sea, where this power and toughness of this creature are equal to the number of islands you control, which we only have 1 non-island. Well, the Jawari Disruption, so 2 non-islands with the Otawara and the Jawari Disruption, but all the rest of our lands are islands. So this will at most, or at minimum, come in as a 4/4, unless you have one of those other lands in play. So that's a nice creature to put out there for 4. Best thing about this is when it enters or attacks, you put a flood counter on a target land, and that land is an island in addition to its other types, so you can always put a flood counter on your Otawara, and it will count then as an island, and you'll be good to go. And the best thing about these flood counters on the lands is that your first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs 1 blue or 1 colorless less for each land you control with a flood counter on it. So you attack with this a couple times, you add some flood counters, now you're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 mana spells for free, which is great. Next we have the Flow of Knowledge. This is an insane draw spell for blue, where it is a 5 mana, draw a card for each island you control, and then discard 2 cards. So it will most likely be a 5 mana, draw 5, and then you discard 2. But with the Haughty Djinn, discounting this, this will come in for a lot cheaper, and then you can draw a lot of cards with this. And you can also throw some more stuff in your graveyard, which is one of the things that we're trying to do here. And speaking of that, the next creature is the Tolarian Terror. This is a 5 mana, 7 mana, 5/5 that costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So while we're trying to fill up our graveyard with instants and sorceries for the Djinn, we are also doing it for the Terror, because then it could come in as a 1 mana 5/5 with Ward 2. So that you can't really beat that value. So how are we going to get there other than just casting our spells? Well, that's when Jace the Perfected Mind comes in. This Planeswalker can be a game-ending play where you play this. You can play it earlier than the Djinn, you can play it after the Djinn, whichever way you want to do it, and you can instantly mill yourself for 15, which could add a lot of instants and sorceries to the graveyard and make your Djinn into an absolute bomb. Or you just leave it on the field and you can use the other abilities, like the -3/-0 for until your next turn. Or you can mill yourself 3 cards, and then if your graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you get to draw 3 cards. Otherwise, you just draw 1. That's kind of good in a pinch if you really need to draw a card and you don't have any other draw spells in your hand. But you kind of want to keep its loyalty counters as high as possible so you can just do the ultimate, totally tap him out and mill 15 plus cards into your graveyard. I've ended many games by playing a Djinn and then next turn playing a Jace, milling myself for 15, and then being able to swing in for one big gigantic strike through the air. So that's the deck. That's the kind of the strategy that we're trying to do. You can see the color breakdown. We are totally a blue deck. It says 25 lands, but with the amount of card draw and the amount of cycling through different things while we're playing, I don't see the need to add more lands than we currently do, which is 20, 19 islands, and 1 Otawara. That adds the extra spell in our hand that we can discard this and channel it, and we can return artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand, which is nice for the fact that our other bounce spells are for only creatures. This lets us get something else off the battlefield that could really be annoying us. And it costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. We only have 1 legendary creature, so if we happen to have this in play, then this will only cost 3. So that's the deck. Let me know what you think about it. Like, comment, subscribe, throw something down there, do all the algorithm things, and until next time, we'll catch you for the next one.